We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Tesam Beis and Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 39b. This daf is sponsored by Shalom ben Naim in memory of Moshe Eliyahu ben David. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you'd like to sponsor an Amud or a daf, see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amud, the Gemara said that Rav and Rava bar Chana, they saw an individual who was walking by with a garment that was entirely made out of tcheles. And the Gemara continues the story, Gedila Migdal, and these tzitzis on that garment were completely braided. There was no loose strings at all. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav. Rav says, Yoi glima velo yoi techelta. The glima, the garment is nice, but the tcheles, meaning the tzitzis, is not nice because there has to be loose threads. It can't all be braided. It can't all be wound. Rava bar Chana, Amar Rava bar Chana, he says, the opposite, Yoi glima, it's a nice garment. V'yoi techelta, and the tzitzis are also nice. It's fine that it's entirely braided. And the Gemara continues, B'mai kamiflagi, what are they arguing about? What is the root of the machlokis? And the Gemara explains, Rava bar Chana Sava, Rava bar Chana, who says it can be entirely braided, he holds, Ksiv Gedil, Uchsiv Pasil. It says in the Pasuk Gedil, and it also says in the Pasuk Pasil, and Gedil is mashma that it should be braided, and Pasil is mashma that it's a loose thread. And so therefore we understand as follows, O Gedil, O Pasil, either it can be Gedil, as the Pasuk says, Gedilim ta'aselach, it can be braided, or it can be Hakonaf Psil Techeles, it can be loose. Either way is appropriate. But Rav holds Liolam Psil Ba'in, and really you need to have loose threads. You can't braid the entire thing. Vahi Gedilim Liminyanahu Dasan. When it says Gedilim Ta'aselach, that's actually to tell you the number of threads, and it goes as follows: Gedil Shnayim. Gedil would imply already two threads, because you can't braid if you don't have two strings. You have to wind one around the other, and then Gedilim Arba, and then Gedilim doubles it, and that means four strings. And then once you have the four strings and then you loop them through, that turns into the 8 strings that we have. Asay gedil uposleu mitocho. And the idea is you make this gedil, and then posleu mitocho, you have some part of it that's braided and some part of it that is loose as well, again according to Rav. And Rashi explains Gedil Shnayim. Gedil means Shnayim. Kilomar, you have Ksiv Gedil Ta'asalach. Let's say I just said Gedil. Mashma Beis Chutin. That would sound like 2 strings. De'in Gedil Pachos Mishnayim. You can't have less than 2. Hashtag Ksiv Gedilim Mashma Arba. Now that it says Gedilim, that's 4. Asay Gedil Midalir Chutin. So you take these 4 threads and you make Gedil. Shiyasim Dalir Chutin Bechor Hatalis. You take the 4 strings, you put them through the hole in the garment. Ulecheshayichvel and V'yasa Mehen Gedil Yehushmona. Then when it doubles over, because now it's folded over through the hole, it's going to be 8, and you'll make Gedil. What that means, according to the first explanation of Rashi, is the string that you wind, that is part of the number 8, as we said on the previous Amud. That's one explanation of uposlei mitocho. And Rashi continues with another explanation, Lishnachrino poslei mitocho tana pasil onaf lamat. It means to say that the loose part should be on the bottom. So again, you braid it at the top as we do, and then you leave the strings loose on the bottom. And the Gemara continues, Amar Shmuel Mishmei de Levi. Shmuel says in the name of Levi, Chutei Tzemer, if you have strings of wool, Potrin Bishal Pishton, that is going to exempt, that is effective. Let's say you have a linen garment, you can have the strings made out of wool. Now we should note over here that the tcheles strings, those strings that are dyed blue, are certainly wool. That's not a question, because that's the definition of a tcheles thread. The question is the white strings, and what Shmuel is saying in the name of Levi is, even though it's a linen garment, maybe you'd say there's a problem of shatnez over here, you could use some other kind of string. No, you can use chutei tzemer, and that is perfectly fine. Rashi explains chutei tzemer potrin b'shal pishna osam shnei chutin shal lavan. The white strings im shal tzemerhein, if they're made out of wool, potrin b'sadin shal pishtan, that's fine. That exempts. It's considered to be a fulfillment of the mitzvah by a garment that's linen im hatcheles with cheles. V'afagav deleka hashtam in knaf. Now, even though in this situation it's not of the same type as the garment is linen, and now all of the threads of tzitzis, cheles and the white, is all going to be made out of wool. The havishel tzemer, because it's made out of wool. Kevan the cheles shnayim chutin hein the cheles imraninu. Once we know already that the cheles is obviously made of wool, upot b'shel pishton, and that exempts. That's effective by a linen garment. Da cheles kasav rachmana behedya. It says says in the pasuk explicitly tcheles. So lavan the tzemer nami poter b'shel pishtan misham lavan. So when it comes to the white strings as well, even though it's a linen garment, but wool tzitzis are going to be fine. That again is the statement in the name of Levi. And so the Gemara continues, they had the following question. What about the reverse? Shel pishtan ma'u sheyifteru b'shel tzemer. What if there's a wool garment? Can you have linen threads as the tzitzis? Maybe tzemer b'shel pishtim hu de potter. Maybe if you have wool strings, that works with a linen garment. Dekevon de tchelas potter, because since the blue strings are wool, so lavanami potter. So if the white strings are wool also, it will exempt. That will be a fulfillment. Avol pishtim b'tzemer lo, but maybe the other way around. Let's say you have a wool garment to have linen threads. Maybe that's problematic. Oh, Dilmor, maybe kevon dechsiv, since it's written in the pasuk lo silbash shadnez, don't wear shadnez tzemer ufishtim yachdav. It says you can't have wool and linen together, and then it says gedilim ta'asalach, that you should make these gedilim, you should make the tzitzis. So it's telling you that tzitzis, there is no issue of shadnez by tzitzis. So then maybe lo shna tzemer b'pishtim v'lo shna pishtim b'tzemer. It doesn't matter if it's wool with linen or linen with wool. It doesn't matter which direction. Even if you were to have a wool garment, one would be able to have linen tzitzis. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come in here the following proof. Diamar Rachva Amar Rav Yehuda, because Rachva said that Rav Yehuda said, Chutei tzemer potrin b'shel pishton potrin b'shel tzemer. If you have strings of wool, that works with a linen garment. Linen string, that's going to work with a wool garment. It does work in either direction. And Chutei tzemer upishtim, and when it comes to both wool and linen strings, potrin b'chol makom, that's going to work with any kind of garment, va'afilu b'shiroin, even if the garment is made out of silk. And Rashi explains, Chutei tzemer upishtim, lavon shel pishtim v'shel tzemer tcheles. That would mean to say, let's say you have the lavon, the white strings are pishtim, they're linen, and then when it comes to the tcheles, that's going to be wool. Potrin b'chol makom, those work. B'chol minei beged, the point is it works by any garment. Ve'afilu b'shiroim, even by silk. Demau detema, what might you have said? Shiroin peturin. Rashi says you might have said that a silk garment is totally exempt and doesn't even need on a doraisa level to have tzitzis at all, and then it would be a problem of kilayim. V'hav kilayim shelo b'makom mitzvah. Then if you were to have, let's say you had linen white threads and you had tchelis, which was wool, and you use that combination of linen and wool on a silk garment, that would be a problem of kilayim because there's no mitzvah in that case. Kamash malon dechayavin. So what it's teaching us over here is that no, shiroim is obligated in tzitzis, and since shiroim are obligated in tzitzis, you can even use a combination of wool and linen threads. And the Gemara continues, Upligad Rav Nachman. Now this statement argues on Rav Nachman. Diyam Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman says, Hashiroin peturin min hatzitzis, that silk, actually such a garment is exempt from tzitzis. And the Gemara continues, Eisvei Rava Rav Nachman. Rava asked Rav Nachman the following question. The Brisa says, Hashiroin v'haklach v'asrikin kulan chayavin betzitzis. These are all different kinds of silk. Shiroin is regular silk. Klach is floss silk, which is an inferior kind. Srikin is corded silk. Kulan chayavin betzitzis. They're all obligated in tzitzis, so clearly this brisa is saying that there is an obligation of tzitzis when it comes to shiroin, when it comes to silk. And the Gemara continues and answers that Rav Nachman would say midrabanan. That just means on a drabanan level there's an obligation of tzitzis, but not on a doraisa level. The Gemara continues, one second, if so, ema seifa, look at the end of that brisa. V'kulan semeru pishtim potrin bohen. It says that by all of these garments, one can use wool and linen to exempt them as the tzitzis. Now that should be a problem of kilayim if the obligation is only d'Rabbanan. If you say correctly that the obligation of tzitzis by silk is d'oraisa, hainu demishtaru bu kilayim, then it would make sense to say kilayim is permitted. Elo yamr d'Rabbanan, but if you say it's only d'Rabbanan, heichim mishtri bu kilayim, how could kilayim be permitted? And the Gemara continues and answers to this. Amos say, the Brisa really meant to say, O tzemer, O pishtim, that when it comes to silk garments, so the obligation is only midrabanan, and not that you can use wool and linen together as the tzitzis, but you can use either wool or you can use linen in such a situation. And the commentaries do note that obviously one is not only going to use linen threads in such a situation, because then you wouldn't fulfill the requirement of tchelis, of the blue threads, which have to be wool. The point over here is just that the Brisa means to say one doesn't need to specifically use silk threads, again in a situation of a silk garment, but again one is not allowed to use kilayim in such a case because the obligation is only d'Rabbanan. And the Gemara continues, Hachanam mistabra, makes sense to give this answer to Katani Seifa, because what does it say at the end end of the brisa, it says, Hein b'minon potrin, shalo b'minon ein potrin. It says that these things, they're potter with the same type. If you use the same type for the tzitzis, then it's exempt, it's okay, but not the same type, then it's not okay. And how do we understand this line? Now, if you're going to say correctly that by silk, the whole obligation is d'Rabbanan, hainu demifteru b'minon, then we can understand that in theory, you can even use silk strings, silk threads as an exemption as the tzitzis, because the Rabbanan would allow that. Elo yamr doraisa, but if you're going to say that silk garments are obligated in tzitzis on a doraisa level, tzemer upishtim hu depatar, then it should only be tzemer and pishtim, it should only be wool and linen. We would not say that silk tzitzis would be okay by a silk garment if there was a doraisa requirement for tzitzis, because on a doraisa level it must be tzemer and pishtim, it must either be wool or linen. But the Gemara says this proof is not a proof. Imisham halo area, if it's just from this last line of the brisa, that's not really a proof. Because Rava, because maybe this brisa follows Rava, that really, even if it was D'oraisa, silk tzitzis might be okay. The Rava Rami Ksiv, because Rava said there's a contradiction. The Rava Rami, Rava said there's a contradiction in Psukim. Ksiv haknaf min kanaf, it says kanaf, that it has to be of the same kind as the garment, as the corner. Uksiv, but it's also written Tzemer upishtim, that it has to be wool and linen. And haketzad, how so? Which one is it? Tzemer upishtim potrin bein b'minon bein shalo b'minon. The answer is that wool and linen, they exempt whether the garment is made from wool and linen or whether it's made from something else. Those are always effective for tzitzis. But shar minin, but when it comes to other kinds of garments that are not wool or linen, b'minon potrin shalo b'minon ein potrin. So there, it has to be of the same type to exempt and not of a different type. And so therefore, again, according to Rav, it comes out on a doraisa level. If you have a silk garment, it would be fine to have silk tzitzis. And the Gemara continues with Rav Nachman. Now, according to Rav Nachman, who says that other garments that are not wool or linen are not obligated in tzitzis on a doraisa level, what does he follow? He follows Kedatana Dever Rabbi Yishmael. He follows what was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. The Tana Dever Rabbi Yishmael, because it was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. Hoel v'nemru begodim b'Torah, since it says begodim in the Torah without specifying what the material those garments are made out of. Stam, it just says it's stam without specifying. Uparad lach hakasa be'echon mehen semeru pishtim. But one time when the Torah says begodim, talking about by tzaras, it does specify tzemer and pishtim, it specifies wool and linen, so af called tzemer pishtim. So to any time it says beged, it's talking only about tzemer and pishtim, and only there is there a doraisa requirement of tzitzis. But the Gemara continues, Amar Abaya, Abaya says, V'hai Tana Dever Bishmal, this Tana Dever Bishmal that we just quoted above, Mafka Me'idach Tana Dever Bishmal, it actually negates another teaching, it's in contradiction with another teaching of Tana Dever Bishmal. The Tana Dever Bishmal, because it was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, beged, it says garment, ein liela beged tzemer. I only know that we're talking about a wool garment. Minayin l'rabos tzemer gemalim v'tzemer arnovim v'notza shalizim. How do we know to include the wool of camels and the wool of rabbits and the hair of goats? V'hakalach v'asrikin v'hashiroyin. And again, those are the various kinds of silk. How do we know? Minayin, from where do we know to include those as well? Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says o beged, it says o beged. And Rashi explains, Mapik me'idach Tana, this goes against the other Tana Dever Bishmal, ha'idach mar bekol ha'begadim, because the other Tana Dever Bishmal that we're quoting now is including all begadim, as it says, Tzemer arnavim v'notza, talks about the wool of rabbits, and v'notza tzemer shalizim, that's the hair of the goats, kari notza, it's called notza, which literally means feathers, lefi she'ein rach kashar tzemer, because it's not soft like other wool. Minayin, from where do we know, shemitamin b'negoyim, Rashi understands this Tana Dever Bishmal is talking about Tumas Tsaras. How do we know it applies to all of these other materials? Talmud Lomar, O Beged, Beged Semer, O Beged Pishtim. It says O Beged, and therefore that includes all of these other kinds of materials. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Mem Amud Aleph.